How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Peites, Daf 89 of Masechta BavaMetzia. Friends, your friends. Page 89 is cool. We're talking about more like this miser and workers eating stuff, I guess. What's also cool about 89 is that tomorrow's Daf is Daf 90. We're getting close. Chevra, one day we're going to finish BavaMetzia, and that's going to be insane. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, finishing BavaMetzia is the biggest deal. Is the biggest finishing deal that I've, in my mind. BavaMetzia has just been mind blowing. Wow. I haven't felt this way. I keep on saying it over and over. Sorry, I haven't felt this way about any other Masechta. It just blows my mind. 3 months into it, and my mind is still blown. I hope another month my mind will still be blown, because then that would mean my mind will be blown for the whole Masechta. Wow. Okay. We're going to start in that Peites Amud Aleph. I think what it is that it's like really hard, but not in a ridiculous way. Like Eruvin and Yavamis, like those are really hard and like just annoying kind of ways, you know? This is just really, really like you need to work hard. And I guess I kind of like working hard, if you can't tell. Alright, let's go. Alright, I guess I like working hard in kind of ways that don't drive me crazy. Alright, we're starting that Peites Amud Aleph, like 5, 6, 7 lines or something into the page. Dayish, okay, when it comes to threshing, right? We said Lesachsom Shar Bedisho, do not muzzle a ox when it is threshing, i.e. it has to be allowed to thresh. And okay, fine, so the cow's allowed to eat when it's working. And then we also talked about how the same thing, right? We just said, the last thing we said, right, was that that we compare shor to people and people to shor and stuff. So Beseder, I guess all the same halachas apply. And we say, okay, so let's learn, what do we learn from Dayish? Dayish madayish miyuchid. So threshing is specific in that gidule karka. Okay, you thresh something that grows from the ground, like wheat or something. Ufoil oichel boy, and while in this pre-miser kind of state, like this processing state, a worker can eat it. So I've called shegidule karka poil oichel boy. So also, anything that grows from the ground, a worker can eat, as long as it's not yet chayv and meiser, a worker can eat it. But yotza, to the exclusion of hachorle v'amechabetz v'amegaben, somebody who's milking cows, or making butter. I think there's different ways to understand mechabetz, possibly making butter, v'amegaben, making cheese. She'en gedule karka. There you're not working with things that grow from the ground. Ve'en poil oichel boy. And therefore a worker would not be able to eat while he is preparing these items. Lamali, but why do I need this limud? Michi sove bekerim re'echo nafka. Can't I learn that out from the pasuk of kisove bekerim re'echo, when you go into your friend's vineyard? And therefore we're talking about vineyard, something that grows from the ground. It's trich nisht. We need this because since we had said 2 days ago, I think, that from the word kama it comes to exclude all. Right? Was it? Yeah, I think that was from 2 days ago. Wow, this is all like the last 2 days has all just been like one long blurb. Anyways, since we said that from the word kama, we include all things that kind of, all things that essentially come from the ground, that stand up. Well, really, that stand up. And therefore we included like fig trees and date palms and stuff. So l'rabos nami midi delav gidule karkininu. Maybe we'll include things that, all things that stand up, like even cows and things that don't necessarily go from the ground. Kamash Milan. Therefore we learn out from this Dayish thing that nisht, we're davka talking about things that grow from the ground. Givaldik, weiter. Tani idich, we have another brisa. Dayish, when it comes to threshing. Madayish miyuchid Davish b'shas gemar melacha poyel oichel boy. So just like threshing wheat, is something that a poyel, that a worker who's harvesting wheat is allowed to eat while he's harvesting. Avkol shehu b'shas gemar melacha poyel oichel boy. So also that includes that whenever you're at the end of a melacha, i.e. harvesting, so then the poyel can't eat it. Yotza menachish b'shumim v'tzolim, to the exclusion of somebody who's weeding garlic or onions. Hoil ve'ein gemar melacha ein poyel oichel boy. Since you're not harvesting it, so the worker would not be able to eat them, right? So if you're just like weeding around like garlic and onions, so that is not an activity that would allow the worker to partake. Only b'shas gemar melachton, only at the end of the melacha, at the harvesting phase. Lomali, why do I need this? However, we learned that out, I think again 2 days ago. From ve'el kel yuchal lo sitein means that we're talking about at the time that you'd be putting it into a vessel, i.e. at the time of harvest. So we already know that we're talking about at harvest, not prior. So this is interesting. Lo tzricha afagav dika mashlif katine mi bene alime. Interesting. Well, actually, me el kel yuchal lo sitein wouldn't be enough, because there's an interesting scenario, which is, let's say you have onions, okay, and some of the onions just aren't going to be that big. They're not going to get big. Some onions just won't grow that big, apparently. Whereas other onions will grow bigger. So what you'll do is you go through the patch and you'll essentially pull out onions that just, they're destined to be small onions, and therefore why should they take up space in the patch that the bigger onions can expand into? So it's an interesting kind of like falling through the cracks kind of scenario, because you're not harvesting the onions. That's not your goal. You're not going to harvest onions. You're going to, basically, sort of, it's part of like the growing process, is going into the field, and, in order to make sure that the onions that are going to be big are going to be as big and healthy as possible, you're going to pull out the onions that are not going to grow big. Now, those onions are edible. They're fine. You will take them and put them into the vessel of the Baal Habayis, but it isn't the harvest. It isn't the Shas Gemar Melachton. You're not doing this to harvest onions. You're doing this, to ensure that in the future, when you harvest the onions, you'll have very good onions. So to do so, you remove the onions that aren't going to get big, but this isn't a harvest. So now, here's a scenario where you will be putting it into the vessel. So if we only had that, pasuk, so it is a scenario where you're putting it into the vessel of the Baal Habayis, so I would think that you would be able to eat them, but we have dayish to say this limud of it has to dafka be it's something that you can eat b'shas gemar melachton, and this is not shas gemar melachton, so taka you wouldn't be able to eat it. Tani idoch nocha braise dayish, when it comes to threshing, ma dayish meyuchid davar shelo nigma melachto lemaiser poyel oichel boy. Threshing is a scenario where the product is not yet at a stage of being chayiv in meiser. It's still in the threshing phase. It would only be chayiv in meiser once it's either pnei habayis or chotzer kovas, or maybe putting it in a pile, whatever. It's not, as I said yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago, I can't remember what's what anymore. But like, it's not super clear to me. I think maybe it was yesterday. I think. Like maybe just putting it in a pile would be enough. But anyways, you're still threshing it, so it's not yet chayiv in meiser, and you can eat it during that at that point. The worker. Avkol shaloi nigma malachto lemeiser poyel oichel boy. So also anything that is not yet chayiv in meiser, is not nikba lemeiser, so then the worker can eat it. Yotza haboda b'tmarim, to exclusion of if you have like dates, pressed dates, and you are separating them. So now these pressed dates are already chayiv in meiser. So in that case, yotza haboda b'tmarim, if you're like separating dates of grogris or figs, hoil v'nigma malachto lemeiser, since they're already chayiv in meiser, ein poyel oichel boy. So at that point, a poil would not be able to eat any of those dates. But we learn in the Brisa, but we learn in a Brisa, it says, what do you mean? Somebody who's separating these dates or these figs, the worker can eat from them. When we say that the worker can eat it, that's talking about like dates or figs that they're like not ripe yet, and then you have to put them into like some special basket for them to ripen or whatever. So in that situation, they're not actually chayiv in meiser yet, and that's why you can eat them. But if we're talking about just regular like pressed dates or pressed figs, they would be already chayiv in meiser, and therefore you'd be unable to eat them at that point. So now says the Gemara something interesting. Tanida, we have another brisa. Dayish, when it comes to threshing, ma dayish miyuchad is specific. Dover shelo nigma malachto lechalo. So the previous brisa just said something that is not yet nigma malachto lemaiser, but now we're saying that it's something that's not nigma malachto lechala. And a worker can eat it. So as long as it's not yet chayiv in chala, so chala applies to doughs. So as long as it's not yet a dough, so then the worker can still eat it. Yotza alosh, to the exclusion of somebody who needs dough, v'amakatif, or shapes it, v'ofer, or bakes it, shenigma melachto l'chala, at that point it's already chayiv in chala, the ein po'el oichel boy, so the worker would not be able to eat from it at that point. V'alo nigma melachto l'maiser, but fact the Gemara gavaldiga kasha. 1 second, I don't know, why are we talking about chala? Chala comes later. Meiser would already be from whatever, you got to the point that it's chayiv in meiser. Let's say you put it in a pile. So now it's chayiv in meiser. So at that point already, the pile can't eat it. Chala, the chiyuv chala comes later on. Once you make it into a dough, at that point it's going to be chayiv in chala. Now, so I don't understand, why are we saying that that the pile can eat it up until the time that it's chayiv in chala? That's not true. Because before then it's already chayiv in meiser. And we said that once already, the previous brisa said that once already it's chayiv in meiser, he can't eat it. Lo kasha, it's no problem, kam b'chutz la'aretz, lo kasha b'chutz la'aretz askinun, deleka meiser. Well, this brisa that's talking about chala is talking about in chutz la'aretz. In chutz la'aretz there's no meiser, so because there's no meiser, so then that's why we're talking about chala. Yochi chala nami leka. But if we're talking about in chutz la'aretz where there's no meiser, there's also no chala. Okay, Ela Olam Ba'aretz. Okay, we're really talking about in Eretz Yisrael, where I live, in Eretz Yisrael. V'lo kasha, it's no problem. B'sheva shekivshu, b'sheva shechilku. Interesting answer. Very interesting answer. So the Gemara says, our Brisa is talking about, after the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael with Yoshua, so there was 7 years where they were taking over the place, and then there was another 7 years where they were dividing up the place. During those 14 years, there was already a chiyuv chala. Chala, right, means shenichnusu la'aretz, right, already there was a chiyuv chala from the time that the Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael. But meiser was only later on, after everybody was settled, 14 years later. So during that time, there was no chiyuv meiser, but there was a chiyuv chala. So that's what we're talking about. So during that period, so long as it was not yet chayiv in chala, so then the workers would be able to eat it. Because we say that during the 7 years that the Yidden were capturing Eretz Yisrael, and for the 7 years that they divided up Eretz Yisrael, the Yidden were there was already a chiyuv chala, but there was not yet a chiyuv of meiser. But frekti Gemara, another gevaldige kasha, midi meiser kagarim. What a point. The Gemara says, wait, but 1 second, it's not about the meiser per se, it's about the Gemar Melacha. The meiser is a technicality. Meaning, when we say that a worker can eat it until it's chayiv in meiser, it's not the meiser that's important, it's that he can eat it until the Gemar Melacha, until it's completed its work. And it's now chayiv. The fact that it's chayiv in meiser is a result of the fact that its work is done. But say you have a scenario, for example, the first 14 years in Eretz Yisrael where there was no meiser. Okay, fine. Technically there was no meiser, but the work is already complete. So at that point you wouldn't be able to the worker would not be able to eat anymore. The fact that there technically is no meiser right now, mazel tov, but the work is done. The worker can no longer eat it. So back to our question, right? Why is this brisa saying that the worker can eat it up until it's chayiv in challah? But even prior to it being chayiv in challah, it was chayiv in meiser. And even if you're going to tell me, well, during the first 14 years in Eretz Yisrael, there was no meiser. Okay, that's very smart of you. But it was still already nigmar malachto from the time that it was like put in a pile or whatever. So therefore, why are we saying that the worker can eat it until it's chayiv in challah? Already from the time that it was completed its work, the worker would be unable to eat it. So listen to what Ravina says. Ravina, kroich vitani. No, these are not two separate brises. It's not like one brisa says that you can eat it until it's chayiv in meiser, and then the other one is saying that you can eat until it's chayiv in challah, and they're contradicting each other. No, they're not contradicting each other. It's not two separate things. Rather say, when it comes to threshing, madayish miyuchid davar shelo nigmar melachto lemeiser u lechallah. That threshing is something that is not yet complete with regard to either meiser or to challah, ufoy loichol boy, and a worker can eat it. Avkol shelo nigmar melachto lemeiser u lechallah poyel shel oichol bo. So anything that is not yet complete, its work is not yet complete for meiser or for challah, a worker can eat it. And what that means is that it depends on the thing. If we're talking about grapes, grapes are things that don't have a chiyuv challah, well then meiser is going to be the important thing over here. But if we're talking about wheat, which does have a chiyuv challah, so then it's not the meiser thing, that will be ruled by challah. So you'd be able to, so when it comes to wheat, so you can eat it up until it's chayiv in challah. When it comes to something like grapes or dates or figs that don't have a chiyuv challah, but they have a chiyuv meiser, so then like grapes, I guess, is probably a better example, maybe because the chiyuv is midaraisa. So I believe. So then, the worker would be able to eat it only until it's chayiv in meiser. Frag the Gemara Yibaylu they ask a kasha poyel maushi yahave baor v'yochal. Givaldige kasha. I think, as I said yesterday, right, I don't exactly understand how people would eat like wheat as it's being harvested. Like, can you eat wheat like that? I just simply don't know. But here's one option: is that maybe you can like put it, heat it up in the fire. Maybe that would help you eat it. Alternatively, it could be right. Rashi says you could do that with like wheat, but also with grapes, actually. So I think, right, so let's actually work with grapes. I think grapes will be a better thing to work with. But anyway, so can you take like a cluster of grapes, right? So you're harvesting grapes. Can you take a cluster of grapes and heat them up? It'll make them more geschmack. So we had said the other day that you can't have anovim v'davar acher. You can't have anovim, grapes, and another thing to make them more geschmack, because then you can eat a lot of them, though. If you're harvesting grapes and you want to take a grape here and there, so beseder, take a grape here and there, but don't start, bringing ketchup and, all things like that, and start, making a whole thing out of it, a whole meichel. No, you can't do that. Sorry, Mom. Yeah. Akoponim. So again, so you buy the asakasha. Poyel maushe, you have a bor. Can you kind of heat it up in like fire, put them over fire, make them more geschmack, v'yoichal, and then eat them. Would that be in violation of what we said, I think 2 days ago, that you can't have grapes together with something else? You can eat the grapes alone, but you can't make a concoction with them. Or not, or can you taka do it? So, Tashma coming here. Rashay balabayis lahashkis poyalim yayin. A balabayis can give the workers wine to drink. Kadesh lo yochlu anov harbe. Okay, apparently, I guess if he gives them wine to drink, then I guess maybe they'll have less of an appetite. I don't know what it'll be, but they'll eat less grapes. And obviously, it's in his interest that they should eat less grapes, so that he gets a bigger yield. So the balabais can give his workers wine to drink so that they won't eat as many grapes. They also might not harvest as many grapes, but all right. And also the workers would be allowed to dip their bread in brine, and that will, I guess, increase their appetite or whatever, and they'll eat more grapes. So we're saying that it's okay to do things so that you'll eat more grapes. So you could just don't do, right? As long as you don't have anovim v'davar acher, as long as you don't have grapes, as long as you don't eat the grapes with something else, you can do things that would make you eat more grapes, such as you can, I guess during their lunch break, maybe, I don't know, they could dip their bread in brine, which will give them an appetite to eat more grapes. That's okay. So also, if you're going to heat up the grapes and then that'll make them better and you'll eat more grapes, that we want to say that would be okay as well. So long as you don't actually take another thing and make a combination. So says the Gemara, I'm not satisfied with that brisa. That brisa is about doing things to people to affect their appetite, right? The balabayas can give them wine to drink so that they'll have less of an appetite. They're allowed to dip their bread in some kind of a brine, and that will increase their appetite. But the grapes themselves, you're not doing anything to. Here we're talking about, can you actually put the grapes over a fire to make them more gishmak? We're not asking about can the person do epis. Can you do eat epis to increase your appetite? That's not what we're talking about. Our kasha is about, can you do epis to the fruit itself? What's the halacha? Toshma, come in here. The workers can eat the grapes at the head of the row, so, or what do you, a vineyard, a row? Is that what you call it? Do you call it a row in a vineyard? A row in a vineyard? Why not? A vineyard row thingy. I gotta ask my friend Donnie Friedenberg. So the thing is, I guess at the end of the row or something, that's where the sun comes on its stark, and those are the best grapes, the most gishmaki grapes. So we're saying, Toshma Payalin Orchlin and all of them Baroshe Umanios, they can eat the grapes at the end of the row, which are the most gishmak. But do not put them over fire. So it sounds like it's settled. Don't put the grapes over the fire. There you go. No. Hasa mishum bitol milacha. No. Actually, in that brisa says the Gemara, it's not actually about can you put the grapes over fire or not. That's actually not the point. The point is that you could be mevatel malacha. The point is that you're being paid to work, not to be heating up grapes. But kikami barlam, what we're asking is, heichadika ishto one of mine. What if he had brought his wife and kids with him? So he's busy working. He's not skipping a beat. And then his wife and kids are going to heat up the grapes. Can he then eat them because he's going to have a bigger appetite? Or he's going to eat more of them. That's the kasha. So meaning when we just said in the brisa that he can't heat them up, he himself can't heat them up because it's bittul malacha. He's being paid to work, not to be heating up grapes. But ask the Gemara, what about a scenario though where other people are going to heat them up for him? Would he be able to eat them, or is that a problem because he's going to eat too many of them? Tashma, come in here. Lo yahavev ba'or v'yochal. So here's a brisa: don't put the grapes over fire and then eat them. V'lo yichmor ba'adama. Don't put them into warm ground to heat them up. V'yochal, and then eat them. V'lo yafrich agabi asela, and don't break them on crush them on a rock. V'yochal, and eat them. Havamafich hayad ayad, but he can crush them in his hands. V'ochal, and eat them. So we see again, lo yahave ba'or v'yochal. You can't put them over fire. So the Gemara says also asum nami. They're also mishum bittul malacha. The concern there isn't actually about heating up the grapes. What the brisa there is concerned about is again bittul milacha. It makes sense to say that it's davka talking about bittul milacha. Mishum masuke peira, because if you say that it's about that we're saying don't heat up the grapes because you're going to make them more geshmak. Well, that wouldn't make sense because sela my masuke peira ika, because one of the things listed there is don't crush the grapes on a rock. If we're talking about making the grapes more geshmak, how would crushing a grape on a rock make it more geshmak? Well, mamtik porta. Well, the truth is, no. Even by crushing it on a rock, it could be that it'll make it sweeter, and therefore it's not necessarily a proof that it's talking about bittul malacha. Fine, okay, but still, it's inconclusive. Toshma, come here. Okay, if you have workers that are essentially harvesting figs, dates, grapes, olives, Hare'elu ochlim ufturim. Okay, so while they're harvesting, they can eat and they're potter, right? They're potter. They don't have to separate mice or whatever. Shatar zichsa loy. Okay, as we know, the Torah says that they're allowed. Befitam lo yochlu, but don't eat these fruits, this produce with their bread. Elam cannot do rishus mi balabais unless you ask special permission from the balabais. V'lo yispos bamelach v'yochal, and don't dip this produce in salt and eat them. So we see that you can't dip them in salt, and therefore we'll say you also can't put them over fire. Melach vadai kanov v'davar acher domi, to which we say, no, 1 second. Dipping in salt would definitely be a problem vis-a-vis anov v'davar acher, grapes and something else. Yeah, you definitely can't put them in salt. Right, but our question is about putting them over fire where you're not actually combining it with anything. So you're not like adding salt to it. You're not, eating it with bread. You're not, taking something else and eating it together with grapes. You're just eating the grapes plain. You're just heating them up first. That's the question that we have. So now the Gemara says, we just said that you can't dip them in salt. But is that really true? V'yochal, and eat them. We have a contradiction. If somebody hires a worker, le'ader, to dig, le'kashkesh, to cover roots, tachas hazeisim, underneath the olive trees, harezeh lo yochal, so he cannot eat them because he's not harvesting. Sacho livtzor, sacho limsok, sacho lelaket. But if he hired them to harvest, essentially to harvest, to gather, okay, so then the workers can eat, and they wouldn't have to separate mice, or they can eat it. Because Torah says that they can eat them. Okay. Kotzatz, now if he had made a deal with the balabayas that he can eat what he's harvesting, Dafka made a specific deal with him. So now the thing with making a deal is that it makes it official. And by making it official, it makes it choshuv. By making it choshuv, well, now you have to worry about it becoming chayiv and meiser, and then he can't eat it anymore. Achas yochal. So if he made a deal with the balabayis, well, then he can only eat one at a time. Shtaim lo yochal. He can't eat two at a time, because since he had made a deal, he kind of adds chashivus to them, and then two, as we'll learn at the end of the daf today, two, let's say, grapes together would be considered chayiv and meiser at that point, because he gave them chashivas by making this deal with the balabais. But one at a time would be acceptable. V'sofes b'melach v'yochel, and he could dip them in salt and eat them. And the question is, what's that talking about in terms of dipping them into salt? Right? Is he talking about when he made a deal? Is he talking about when they didn't make a deal? Ilema asef, it's talking about when they made a deal. And obviously we're talking about when he's eating one at a time. Well, came the kotzatz, since he made a deal that he's allowed to eat grapes, well then kol echi deboy lechol, let him eat however he wants. They had made a deal already with the balabais that he can eat them. Let him eat them however he wants. So when we're talking about dipping them into salt, Aresha, it's talking about the Resha, when there is no specific deal, and we're saying that you are allowed to dip them in salt. So, are you allowed to dip them in salt, or are you not allowed to dip them in salt? Amar Abai says, Abai lo kasha, kan be'aretz, kan be'chutz la'aretz. Well, it depends if we're talking about in Eretz Yisrael, chutz la'aretz. Ba'aretz, kava sfisa. That in Eretz Yisrael, where there's meiser, well then, dipping them in salt will be koveya them for meiser. Whereas b'chutz la'aretz, lo kava sfisa. But in chutz la'aretz, where there's no meiser, the assumption seems to be at least not midoraisa. So then, the salt is no problem. So Rava says, Rava mi'ika miti de ba'aretz kava sfisa midoraisa. Is it possible that you can have a scenario where in Eretz Yisrael, dipping in salt would be koveya for meiser midoraisa, u'v'chutz la'aretz, and chutz la'aretz lo kava sfisa muter l'chatchila, and chutz la'aretz muter l'chatchila? I mean, if you look at Rashi, muter l'chatchila, it's like 3 lines into the wider lines. Bitmia, okay, it's a kasha. Heicha de meiser dide midirabanon, where meiser is midirabanon. So where would meiser be there? So I don't. What is it? Is it? I don't know. Where would meiser be dirabanon in Chutz La'aretz? So tikbalei svisa midirabanon. The chodotaken rabbanon came deraisa takun. So the assumption seems to be that in Chutz La'aretz there would be meiser dirabanon. So if a Rava says, I don't understand, how could Abaye make this distinction between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz? If we're saying that in Eretz Yisrael adding salt would be koveh for meiser midoraisa, well then it shouldn't be mutter l'chatchila in derabanan in Chutz La'aretz, where meiser would be derabanan. Elo Amar Rava, rather says Rava, bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. Here's the deal: whether in Eretz Yisrael or not, here is what you need to know about dipping these grapes or produce in salt. Chadalo kava svisa, tarte kava svisa. Okay, so if you only have one, if you're eating like one grape at a time, so dipping it in salt will not be koveya for meiser. If you're eating, however, two at a time, where now we have to be concerned about chashivos, like we said earlier, that if he had made a deal with the balabais that he can eat fruits, well then that makes it like official, kind of like we saw yesterday, I believe. Yeah, that like a lokeach is chayiv in meiser midirabanan because it makes it choshuv even in the field. So by making a deal, so then even two would then be by making a deal, so then two would be choshuv, but also dipping in salt would make it choshuv. So again, so Elo Marova bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz, whether in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz, chada lo kavas visa. If we're just talking about like one grape, well then you could dip it in salt and that won't make it choshuv to be chayiv in meiser. Where am I? Chada lo kavas visa tarte. But if we're talking already about two grapes, kavas visa, so then dipping in salt would be kovea for meiser. All right. Kotzatz. Now, if you had made a deal with the balabais, well now, bein sofas u bein lo sofas, regardless of if he dips it in salt or not, achas ochel, well, he can eat one grape at a time, because he made a deal that he can eat grapes, he can eat them however the heck he wants, with salt, without salt. Shtaim lo yochel, but he can't eat two, because he had made a deal, so then just by definition, having two of them at a time, in the context of this sort of deal that he made with the balabais, would make them choshev, and he can't eat them regardless of if there's salt or not. Lo katzatz, now if there was no deal, velo sofas, and he didn't dip them in salt, well then, you can eat one, you can eat two, whatever you want. Right? Ochel shtaim, you can even eat two at a time. Sofas, but if you put them in salt, well then, achas ochel, well then you can eat them one at a time, but shtaim lo yochal, you can't eat two at a time, because that would make them choshev with them being in salt, and then it would be chayiv meiser. Ba'afagav denoto rishus min balabais, even if he asked permission from the balabais, de'it belu l'meiser v'kovas visa, because it would already be considered at that point tevel for meiser, and the dipping would be kovea it for meiser, so therefore you would not be able to dip two at a time in salt, but one at a time would be acceptable. V'tarti dekovas visa minolan, and how do we know that once you have two together, then dipping in salt would be make it choshuv? Well then, minolan Amar Rav Masda Amar Kra ki kibtzem ki Amir Gorna. Ki kibtzom ki Amir Gorna. So we see gathering together is at least two, and we're saying gorin, that would make it considered a gorin, that would be make it choshuv to be chayiv in meiser. So if at that point you dip it in salt, so then it would already be chayiv in meiser. Alright, that was Daf Peites of Sechta BavaMetzia. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.